Hello, everybody.
Hello. How's it going?
Buddy.
Good. All right, are we ready to go?
I'm going to attempt. So sorry, my Wi-Fi is being really so stupid ever since it got really cold here. So I'm going to see if everything works if I keep my camera off like Jacob did last time. We'll go from there. It like froze our whole apartment complex's internet, like cables and bad stuff. So I will try my best.
Goodness. Yeah, that's not fun.
It was negative 25. So it got, yeah. It's great.
No. Okay. Well, we can go ahead and get started. So let me try to share my screen here. Okay. All right. We will go ahead and start. So did everyone get a chance to read the discussion?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or the case study, I guess it would be. So we'll just jump right into it, and I'm going to try to keep us on track with time so we can get to our other project as well. All right, so we just need to define sexual harassment. What does that mean?
In a nutshell, it's unwanted advances of a sexual nature that can be physical, could be verbal, could be innuendo. Pretty broad.
Yeah,
broad description, especially today.
Yeah, it's super. I think super murky. I think that's how the case study even describes it. It's kind of a murky thing because it can even be nonverbal. It can be looks, gestures, anything of that nature that somebody finds to be provocative and like Scott said, unwanted, and maybe even if they are semi-wanted, still can be defined as harassment. It's tough to really put something on it, and I think that the case study kind of implies that when saying that sexual harassment laws themselves are very ambiguous. But I think Scott does a really good example or really good definition of just kind of summing up a pretty baseline definition for what sexual harassment is.
Yeah. And just the differences, Kaylin, if you could expand on quid pro quo and
Absolutely.
Hostile work environment.
So the quid pro quo it's pretty much example of that is sleep with me or you're fired is the example that it gives. So it is a proposed exchange of a job behavior benefit, for sexual favors, like the definition I gave. But then the hostile work environment is an isolated incident. So it's more of a, trying to think of the best way to put it. It's just if there's any kind of intimidation on one's work performance or creating any kind of not good work environment for not really a particular reason.
Yeah. It has the purpose of effect or unreasonably interfering with their work performance, purposefully creating intimidation. So all right, so from the case study, does the Martinez, does her story constitute sexual harassment? Scott, what do you think?
Absolutely.
So is
Yeah.
it, would it be quid pro quo or hostile work environment?
I think it's hostile work environment very much so, but it could bridge into quid pro quo with the threat of being fired or or let go. Like if she feels like what she stated here at the end, if she felt like that if she were to turn something in, that she'd get fired. And I think that that bridges it into the quid pro quo, but it's very clearly hostile work environment.
Right.
I would
And
agree.
it's not, there's not enough information to say, because we don't hear his side of the story in that, but
Yeah.
were you going to say something else, Jacob?
Yeah, I think that to kind of go along with Scott, it could maybe we could stretch it to be quid pro quo, just with the one sentence that the case study does mention about the possibility of her being fired. I would lean more towards hostile work environment, because never in the case study does it explicitly say, he told me that if I was going to say anything that I would be fired, or that if he didn't allow me to be able to do these things, then I'll lose my job. It's just kind of more implied, which I think kind of leans more into that hostile work environment. It kind of impedes her from feeling safe and doing her job, because there's always this lingering feeling that if she does do something, that the possibility of termination is very imminent.
Right.
It also, sorry,
Go
see,
ahead.
it's a little bit tricky because, like, yes, it can have aspects of the quid pro quo, whatever, but at the same time, she's not really scared of the guy. She's more scared of what her husband's going to do if he finds out. But then at the same time, the DaCosta guy, she's talking about transferring, but there's not, there's been layoffs in the company. So it fits to me pretty solid with the hostile work environment, because there hasn't been any set, like, if you do this, you'll be fired. If you don't do this, like, there hasn't been a clear, that we know of, a clear margin.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah. So yeah, I would tend to agree with that. Since we don't have anything from his side, and the only information that we have says he will just deny it, and it turns out he did. But okay, so from reading the note on the sexual harassment, do you think DaCosta got accurate advice when he called the council's office?
I think so. I think that she should have been a little bit more forceful with it. I've never been in a sexual harassment situation, but I've been in harassment situations, and you just don't it's not something you mess around with. Maybe that's because we have a better understanding of the implications and the requirements, today than maybe they did whenever this was. I guess doesn't think it mentions it, but I think that yeah, she did, and she handled it fairly well. But I think she could have been more like, you're obligated, you have to do this. I'm sorry, at the point that you called me, you've instituted a sexual harassment investigation, essentially,
Right.
instead of letting them get off the phone.
I think accurate, yes. I do think that in a circumstance like this, maybe a little bit more empathy and less legality could have swayed DaCosta to feel a lot more comfortable with it. I think it talks a little bit about he's, pondering the possibility of this happening to other individuals in the office as well, not knowing who else is affected. I think that, yes, you have to lean into the fact that this is kind of the policy and procedure that needs to be followed. But if somebody is anonymously coming forth, there's obviously some sort of discomfort with that. And not only just kind of covering the company's tush, but covering the individuals that are being affected by it as well, could have made him feel a lot more comfortable with the prospect of having to open up a formal investigation. And I think that maybe the delivery could have been a little softer, but to Scott's point, a little firmer as well. Like, this is the way that it has to be, but this is why it has to be that way.
Mhm.
other people's lives may be affected that you're not taking into consideration, all of these other things that are implications of any sort of sexual harassment.
Right.
I think that
So-
one thing could have been, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later, could have been emphasized more on both parties. On the council's and on the lawyer's conversation with DaCosta is the protections that are in place for employees reporting sexual harassment. And
Yeah.
I think we could have schooled DaCosta on that so that then he could take that to Martinez. And when she presented her concerns of reporting, he could have said, here's protections that are in place. And now that if we open a formal investigation, there cannot be retaliation, there cannot be X, Y, and Z because of this. So
Yeah, it didn't sound, Kaylin, I guess I'll ask you, what might a lawyer representing the company insist on instituting in a formal investigatory process?
Well, if it's going to be formal and it's going to be like the company's lawyer, I mean, of course, I don't know the details or if things are different depending on the company, but if I had to, guess from what we were reading, they'd probably look into if there were cameras, at the job, see if anything has been caught. So they do have proof. Because at this point, it's what she said. It's he said versus he. Wow, I apologize. I can't talk. He said versus she said. So with that, it's, you have to look for some kind of proof. I mean, innocent until proven guilty. So you've got to look for something. But then at the same time, I mean, if they're both two employees that you have and it's your company's lawyer, you want to figure out who it is, because if it's affecting other employees, then it can just, spiral and get into a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that they're also liable. I think that that's the biggest thing is the liability. I think it talks about like Title VII. Very, very rarely in select states are individuals able to sue directly their individual harassers. When it happens in a work setting, the company itself takes on that lawsuit. You're essentially suing the company for imposing an environment where sexual harassment has been present and is festered. And the company then takes on the liability for an individual's action, which is why it's extremely pertinent to nip anything of that nature in the bud so you can move forward without this implication that you are a company that fosters a culture of sexual harassment.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that probably I would say number one, the lawyer might ask to see a copy of the policy. Like, what does your policy state? What did employees agree to when they began working at your company? And we don't see much about that in the case study. What's the actual policy? What is the thing that you're supposed to do? Okay, we're gonna move on to part 2. So this one's a little bit different. We're gonna kind of break well, I guess part 3 kind of involves us writing our own sexual harassment policy, and that's kind of what the project at the end, like if you've been the group leader, it's not just like reporting on our conversation. You have to take what we talked about and actually like write another report. So I will be creating a sexual harassment policy, which is actually amazing because I can totally use it for my own company. And so
Awesome.
this like it will go directly into my handbook, actually. Like
Love that.
so it's
Double
awesome.
2 birds with 1 stone. You do it for your
I
work and you do it
know.
for school.
Yeah. Yep. So it's awesome. So you guys are going to help me write the Grocery Outlet Easton sexual harassment policy. So all right. So we'll just start from this part 2. So how Jacob, you kind of spoke to this already, but just to review, how would you evaluate Jack DeCoste's opinions or options at this point? And what do you think he should do? Well, yeah, we could actually just take a vote. Like, do you think that he should go ahead and report? like, do you think he should have reported, or like when he was faced with, the dilemma when he heard the conversation, do you think it was best for him to report, or do you think that he shouldn't have, and he should have taken a different course of action? So, I guess we can take a quick vote. What do you guys think? Just yes, report, no, do something else.
Yes,
You can start,
report.
Jacob. Yes, report.
Yeah, I would go with report.
Same here with reporting.
Okay. So everyone voted to report. So how would you in turn explain that to Julia Martinez? And are you willing to get her fired over this? So yeah.
Well, I think the one thing is, this was written in 2005, so who knows how developed I guess we can't say how developed the sexual harassment laws or policies were at that point in time, but he has an obligation to not only a legal obligation, but a moral obligation to report this, whether she wants to or not. And I think he has to make that very clear. Like, now that I've heard this, yeah, maybe I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did hear it. I have to report it. You cannot get fired for me reporting this. And if you do, then that's, that opens up its own can of worms in its own self. Oh.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think with,
go ahead, Jacob.
I think with Julia, part of it may have been just the initial shock of not thinking that anybody heard, and not only figuring out that somebody just overheard your conversation that was private and wasn't supposed to be, she didn't intend it to be heard, and now we're taking it to the nth degree and opening a formal claim. I think that there may just be a little bit of time to need to process it, and I think that he handles the way that he says it, I think, was something to the effect of, I promise that I won't do anything without consulting you first. Not, I promise that I won't do X, or I promise that I won't do Y. But that he will at least give her the courtesy of informing her whatever it is that he decides to do. I think that he should be willing to get her fired over this. I think that if she is fired over it, that there may be a stronger case to be able to incriminate the individual that is perpetrating sexual harassment. So it's tough. It really is. It's somebody's life that you essentially have in your hands, and that makes it feel very real. But at the end of the day, he has an obligation to the company that he works for, and to any possible individuals that are suffering from the same type of treatment. And I think that that's where my moral weight, my moral scale leans more towards those implications than anything else.
Yeah. And does filing a harassment claim prevent her from ever being fired? I don't know. What do you think, Kaylin?
It's actually Googling that currently, because I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm checking right now.
Yeah, I would say it doesn't prevent her from ever being fired, but it prevents her from being fired for the situation.
Yeah, or while the investigation is currently open, there's no action that can be taken against her. But as soon as it's closed, oh, you know what? The perfect storm is happening. We have hundreds of thousands of jobs that are actually being downsized. Looks like you're one of those jobs, along with several hundred others. If you want to make the claim that we fired you because of this sexual harassment thing, we have 700 other people that we had to lay off you're just lumped in with it.
Mhm.
So that's,
I just
I
looked
think
it up.
that, go ahead. Sharon.
So with this is from a, criminal law website. An employee cannot be fired for reporting sexual harassment, but they can be fired for various reasons after reporting sexual harassment. So it doesn't, if you report sexual harassment, you're not safe from ever being fired, but it is illegal for the employer to fire someone for reporting the sexual harassment. And then it's also, but it's not illegal for of course them to be fired for other reasons. So pretty much what Jacob said was dead on.
Mhm. Yeah.
and I think unfortunately this is an all too real situation when you look at larger corporations that have these, larger slews of layoffs. I'm sure that there are a number of individuals that have been done unjustly for sexual harassment or maybe for other reasons. And the quick door out is just to kind of lump them in with everybody else, and you kind of kill two birds with one stone. You get the bad apple, quote unquote, out the
Mhm.
bunch, and you're protecting yourself as your company, but that individual sits with everything that's happened to them, especially because there is no proof. At the end of the day, it's a he said, she said. And I think luckily we live in a world much more progressive than maybe 20 years ago when this was written, that I think that especially with things like the Me Too movement and everything that's happened with people being more vocal about their experiences with harassment in general, that the allegations would be taken much more seriously, and things like that can't be swept under the rug as easily. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but there is no evidence at the end of the day.
Mm.
At least that we know
Yeah.
of.
Yeah. So we kind of all agreed that he did the right thing. It should have been reported. And basically, I mean, I don't know how, I know Scott has a number of years working for corporate, and I think Jacob does too. But unfortunately, if you want to fire somebody, you can. There are ways to make someone either quit or look for ways to get rid of them. And so it's unfortunate, but I fear that someone like DeCoste, who's going to kind of be the whistleblower, doesn't really stand much of a chance after. If they want to get rid of him, they're going to be able to find reason, or her as well. So, but I guess it comes, for me, I think it comes down to like, who do I want to be, and what person do I want to be in this situation? And if I'm the one that heard it, like, I want to live in a world and work in a world where people are treated ethically and fairly and not made to feel unsafe at their job. And so I think it's the benefit outweighs the cost on that for me. That's my personal views on it for reporting it.
I think too, I mean, there's a process, if she'd go ahead, let's go ahead, or they go ahead and do report it. I mean, it's all about documentation. It's like, if you're gonna fire somebody, you have to have documentation. You can't just on a whim do it.
Right.
There has to be a legitimate reason to do it. And so in this case, like, she goes ahead and reports sexual harassment, and then documents if there is a change in her work environment, documents that change. I reported sexual harassment on this day. And then, as you know, these are the things that started the changes. I did that either forced me to feel like I had to leave, or, my workload doubled, all these different things. You could tie it back to that thing and protect yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, I mean, I guess I just look at that, like, if something changed, if you say that yes, there was sexual harassment, and then the work environment does change in a negative way after that pivotal moment, it all ties back to that pivotal moment. And I think there's grounds there for protection. As long as she continues to do her job satisfactorily, assuming that she's done that prior to this there is no reason for her to be fired. Like if she hasn't changed her performance, then she's protected in a sense. And the other thing too, I think it mentions that they're a government contractor. They can lose their contracts because of incidents like this and sweeping them under the rug and not handling on top of it. So there's huge implications for this company to handle this in a very appropriate way. And I know we read at the end that it doesn't turn out like that. But.
Right. Well, and I think what Jacob said is true. Like thankfully we're getting a little bit more progressive on this, where it's in the company's best interest to address these situations and not let them build like that, because then you have like these huge class action lawsuits, or it's like the underlying ethics of the company, and that could take a company down really quickly. So I think it's fortunate that we have some of those that have gone ahead. Okay. All right. So part 3, we're going to go into a new sexual harassment policy. So we're going to so we're kind of taking different perspectives. So you will assign, or we can just volunteer for each person, but from that person's point of view, we have the victim, the harasser, the bystander, and the legal counsel. So from that perspective, what are the things that are going to be important to include in the company's sexual harassment policy? So does anyone have any particular part that they want to, the perspective they want to take it from?
I can go from the potential victim of harassment. So
Okay.
like if you're writing a sexual harassment policy and you're a potential victim, which is everybody, you want to keep your best interest for you and the employer. But of course, if you're looking at it, it's for you. With a lot of sexual harassment cases don't get reported because of fear of what will happen next. So I think that in the policy, it needs to have something of, hey, if you report this and just mention, like, it's illegal for us to fire you, this isn't going to happen, you're safe, we have your interest in mind, but then also give the legalities in the policy to, I'm protected by the law. And then if you guys were to break the law, then I have something to go off to protect myself later. But that way, as somebody who is potentially a victim, you're getting rid of a lot of that fear element, because you're not possibly losing your job because of it. You're not being separated because you're coming forward on something that is, 1, illegal, and 2, just a horrible thing to happen to somebody. So that's kind of where I'm standing on that.
So like eliminate the possibility of losing their job. And then what was the second part of it?
Also,
of being, what was the word you said? Not isolated, but
what word did I use? Not isolated. What did I use?
singled out.
Yeah, so you're not, as sucky as it is to be a victim of sexual harassment, or possibly be one, you're not going to want to be and feel like the only one this has ever happened to. And then with that fear-based, like, I guess not policy, but the stereotype with it, the stereotype of what will happen next, you're protected by the law from your company, by the law with your company, and then by the law against your harasser.
Okay, so like the right to privacy.
Yeah, the right to privacy is definitely a big one. It's a horrible thing, so I hope someone would come forward, but it's also so hard to come forward because you don't want to be treated differently.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, so we just need someone from the point of view of the accused harasser. So let's say not in this case, but let's just say like you were accused, but you didn't do the things that you were accused of. So what kind of protections would we want to have in place if you were like wrongfully accused, maybe?
I think there needs to be something that includes, I think a lot of what happened on branch here, but with the Me Too movement, is it created an environment of guilty until proven innocent. And the accused also needs protections from, like you still have a job. I guess depending on the severity of the situation, you go on administrative leave or whatever it is, but if it comes out that these are not legitimate charges, then you just go back to status quo. You have a job, you're still able to progress and promote and do all the things and not be a black sheep. So there's got to be something in there that I don't know what that sounds like, but something that protects the accused of retaliation as well. I'm looking at some others over here, like looking at the Department of State sexual harassment policy.
I'm also looking at my company that I work for, trying to find their sexual harassment policy. Just because I'm sure I read through it and signed it when I started working. But do I know it? Do I know what I have to do when I am faced with something like this? So I'm trying to find our handbook. There's a confidentiality agreement, but
so an interesting, my daughter had an experience. She worked for Trader Joe's, and there was an incident that, well, there was a lot of incidents, but there was a situation where I feel like they were targeting an employee. So they brought all the female employees in and asked if they had been harassed by anyone at work, if they hadn't had any sexual, harassment type experiences. Well, she had told me about this like months before, but she told them like someone had made comments to her, made her feel uncomfortable, and it turns out it wasn't the person that they were inquiring about, but they never said who they were asking about. And anyways, it ended up being this whole thing, because the guy that she reported was like a prized employee, and so he didn't get he didn't get fired. They did speak to him, and they told him who it was that reported him. So it created the worst experience. So not only was this guy just left there, he was told what she reported and what she said. So there was all kinds of violations all over the place. But anyways, that reminded me of that situation. So it can turn into a big mess, and I'm sure she would have had a lawsuit if we would have been litigious about it. But did you find it, Jacob?
Yeah, I did actually. So it kind of falls under just anti-discrimination and anti-harassment kind of in one. But I think, and in some of the other ones that I've looked at here, and maybe this is helpful for you, is looking at defining what the scope of harassment is. First and foremost is it's defined as this, and then kind of goes in. I'm looking particularly for, I'll go with the bystander portion, because I think Scott had touched on the accused harasser here. So looking at their policies and procedures, it says employees should report incidents of inappropriate behavior or sexual harassment as soon as possible after the occurrence. Employees who believe they have been harassed, regardless of whether the offensive act was committed by a manager, coworker, vendor, visitor, or client, should promptly notify their immediate supervisor. There's no retaliation for filing or pursuing a harassment claim. To the extent possible, all complaints and related information will remain confidential except those who need the information to investigate. All employees are expected to cooperate. Employees who believe they have been unjustly charged with harassment can defend themselves verbally or in writing at any stage. I don't think it says anything about what the bystander is, though. Maybe I should bring it up.
Well, I think it just says report it as soon as it happens, but that's talking about the victim though, right?
Yeah, it says
Like if you're a
employees should
victim.
report incidents of inappropriate behavior as soon as possible after the occurrence, and those who believe they have been harassed should promptly notify their immediate supervisor, designated manager, the company president. The employee's supervisor is involved in the incident. The employee should report it to human resources or a member of upper management. Every claim will be treated seriously, no matter how trivial it may appear. All complaints or other inappropriate sexual conduct will be promptly, thoroughly, and impartially investigated by the company. But it does not at all state what a bystander should do in the situation.
So
I'm getting my works pulled up just because we're a decent corporation, which is Idaho based, but it's pretty big. Because if his doesn't have a bystander one, then now it's making me question if mine has one and kind of going from there.
This is what I have here. I got making allegations of discrimination, harassment, or retaliation that are knowingly false or otherwise in bad faith is prohibited. So that's protecting the accused from, a mud on the wall campaign. But then up here it says, it essentially says that anybody who has any knowledge of any sort of harassment has an obligation to report, or they're in violation of the anti-discrimination policy.
Interesting.
Right here, any employee who believes he or she has been subject to discrimination, harassment, or retaliation, or who is witness or becomes aware of a possible violation of this policy must immediately report such conduct to his or her supervisor, his or her human resources representative, and it lists several other people. Hotline. We have an internal hotline. And then it says reports to the BNSF hotline may be submitted anonymously. And then down further, it says, talks about, they have employees must cooperate in an investigation. Investigations will be timely, impartial, fair, and thorough, treated as confidential to the extent possible while still enabling the employer to conduct an effective investigation and enforce the policy, and then reach reasonable conclusions based on evidence collected and communicated, and communicate those conclusions to the appropriate employee involved in the report. So, and then like going back over here to the Department of State, it talks about that they might bring in like a mediator to like be a impartial third party to conduct the investigation. And I think that's something that's an important thing, because especially in a smaller place, you come in, you can get into a nepotism type situation where the person doing the investigating is best friends with the person being investigated.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And they're not going to give a fair and impartial investigation. So
Yeah, without not seeing that, I think that the policy for a bystander should be to report the situation. I think it's tough. Looking at it from a company standpoint, if I'm writing my policy, I think that you need to report it regardless of the wishes and desires of the victim. I think that it really ultimately from a company's perspective, you need to be aware of issues that are happening within your organization, regardless of how it makes the person feel, which is so backwards as I'm saying it, because it's kind of how the person feels while they're being harassed. But I do think that there likely should be some bystander policy included that stipulates any knowing, kind of, to, I think Scott's policy had a good line, anybody that is knowingly aware of any harassment that is being performed has an obligation. And I would even say a legal obligation to report regardless.
So are we supposed to be writing this, like actually writing a policy? Is that what I'm gathering here?
I'm just making notes of what we're saying. I'm not writing. I mean, I have to put it together as an eloquent, clear document. But
Okay, that's what you have to do then. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
I have to.
it's a
You guys
discussion
don't have to do
or
anything. You
assignment.
guys just have to talk.
I mean, I'll just give an example. I had two. Go ahead. Sorry.
I
Caitlin.
pulled up mine and it's actually interesting that from what I'm reading. So it says that with any kind of harassment or just anything of that nature, of an explicit or, and just anything, it can be used. Of course, they're going to do an investigation. And when it comes to the harassed employee or the one that is being accused of being harassed, there's a complaint made first, and then they're talked about anonymously. So it's not, nobody's being pushed under the rug. But then if it continues, so first you're supposed to go to your supervisor, your human resources professional. But then if it continues after that first bit, then they recommend us going straight to legal, and that if you overhear anything, go directly to legal, because at that point you're just there. Like, you're not part of it, but you've seen it. And then it says that with the particular discrimination or harassment, because they're kind of bind together like Jacobs are, that the actual employment status, if made false accusations, will be looked into for different, of course, punishments is not the right word to say, but you can be immediately terminated after an appropriate investigation. So anything is
So
up
if
to,
you were falsely accusing somebody.
yeah. So if you falsely accuse somebody, you are subject to disciplinary action to and including immediate termination if what you're bringing forward is proved false. Like if there's some kind of proof in it.
Okay. Yeah. So I think, as Scott was reading that, well, as all of you guys were talking, it sounds like first and foremost, there needs to be, especially as the bystander, there needs to be a clearly stated direction for you to go. Like, I think it was Scott's that was reading it. It was like, call this person, report to your manager, then report to HR. And Kaylin just said it too. If HR isn't doing anything and nothing is being done about that, then you go to the legal department. So I think, like, probably step by step, this is what you do, because I don't know that in the case study that we read, I don't know that existed. And if it did, he didn't look at the policy to see where to report. And so probably just
what the church's stance on a lot of these things are. If somebody comes in and it's likely maybe not sexual harassment, maybe it's domestic abuse in the home, and somebody comes forward to the bishop and says that there is domestic abuse happening in the home, what are the responsibilities of the bishop, now being quote unquote a bystander, not anybody that's actively involved, but somebody that now has an obligation to act on what is being presented to them. I wonder in the handbook what is stated about a bishop's maybe legal responsibility to report anything of that nature, or if there is.
I'm looking it up. Right
Scott,
now.
do you know? Scott's
I'm
bishop,
looking it up. It falls under the and then there's the clergy thing. There's some protections there, like somebody can come and confess their sins, and there's certain things that can't be reported. But I'm looking here right now. I don't know. My bishop had that I served with had an instance of abuse in a relationship, and I'm trying to remember how.
There's
How
a
he-
there's a hotline. There is a phone, there is a hotline to report those to as well. I know that bishops can use. What's that? Oh, if you work for a school, or there's a few other jobs that are, you're a mandated reporter, and you're legally required to you're mandated legally to report any abuse or anything that you hear.
Yeah, I think psychologists have that. I don't know if it applies the same to lawyers, but you have like a physician-patient privilege, but it's superseded by anybody that expresses any sort of harm to do towards others, and or have, maybe it's have done, but
It's
I would say
if you have a plan, an actual plan to do it to somebody else or to yourself,
yeah,
or if something has happened to a minor or something has happened to a large group of people.
yeah,
I was a psychology major for a long time.
yeah. So I think
does that apply to bishops as well, like clergy?
I'm
To
looking.
my knowledge, no, that's just the legal psychologist standpoint of what they're able to report, or when they're able to break the confidentiality agreement. But they can't if they want to hurt, if someone says they want to hurt someone and they don't have a plan, they can't report it. But if they discuss details of a plan, then they have to, because then it's caused more than one thought and it's actually a possibility.
So this is respond appropriately to abuse. So it's section 31.1.8. Abuse cannot be tolerated in any form. Take reports of abuse seriously. If you become aware that someone has been abused, report the abuse to civil authorities and counsel with the bishop. Guidelines for reporting and responding to abuse are provided below. Okay, so yeah, for information on what bishops and stake presidents should become aware of. See what this has to say, 38.6.2.1.
38.6.2.
There's an abuse helpline. In some countries, the churches establish confidential abuse helpline to assist stake presidents and bishops. These leaders should promptly call the helpline about every situation in which a person may have been abused or is at risk of being abused. They should also call it if they become aware of a member viewing, purchasing, or distributing child pornography. Helpline is available for bishops and stake presidents to call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Phone number below. Bishops and stake presidents should call the helpline when addressing situations involving any type of abuse. Legal and clinical professionals will answer their questions. Goes through assisting, they'll be given instructions on how to assist the victims, help protect, comply with legal requirements. The church is committed to complying with the law and reporting abuse. Law differs by location. Most church leaders are not legal experts. Calling for the helpline essential for bishops. Bishop must also notify the stake president. So
The second
have an
paragraph of 36.2.7, 38.6.2.7 says that church leaders and members should fulfill all legal obligations to report abuse to civil authorities. In some locations, leaders and teachers who work with children and youth are considered mandated reporters and must report abuse to legal authorities. Similarly, in many locations, any person who learns of abuse is required to report it to legal authorities. Bishops and stake presidents should call the helpline for details about mandated reporters and other legal requirements for reporting abuse. The church's policy is to obey the law. So sounds like that there is an obligation depending on where you were at, and you likely would need to understand legally what you were required to do, but you're not responsible for knowing that. There's resources available to you to be able to understand what you should do. So it's interesting.
What state do you live in, Jacob?
Ohio.
In Ohio. So when we just moved here, like 7-8 months ago to Pennsylvania, the church's policy is we had to go through a huge like series of protection. So we had to do child abuse background check, FBI clearance for fingerprints, and then a police report check.
Just for
Those
being
three
a
things
member in Pennsylvania?
for having any calling.
Any calling? Wow.
Oh,
And
wow.
my son that just turned 18 has to do all of that as well. So
That's
anyone
super
18 and
interesting.
over, I know he's in high school. So we had to go like get all of our fingerprints done and get all of those, like get a
Wow.
child abuse report to even, and it's just, that's the state of Pennsylvania. So I'm just curious to see if any other states are doing that yet, because I think it's
So
probably coming.
I'm in Montana now. I was in North Dakota prior to this, and we just had to do the protecting children and youth online training every 2
Mhm.
years. But I
Mhm.
know like my dad was accused of abusing me when I was a little kid. And even with like, it was never proven that he abused me, but he was never able to be a scout leader, anything like that, participate in scouts in any way.
Wow.
Even though it was not
Yeah,
proven.
which is kind of ironic given the history of what happened. So
Yeah, there's nothing like that. I haven't even had to go through any of the youth training at all. My wife has, she's part of the primary, but I worked with the young men for about a year when we moved here, and recently have just become a ward missionary, and I have had no sort of formal legal training that I've at least not knowingly have to participate in. So it's just super interesting. Pennsylvania is literally right next door. Like it's
you
I
are
know.
supposed
the
to,
state
just for
over.
information,
And
you are
it's
supposed to do the children and youth
starkly
training.
different.
Well,
So,
and I would think that it would, because we moved from California, so I would think if anything, that would be the first one to like
yeah.
get up there on the on the laws. But ironically, I moved from a ward that right before we moved into that ward, we had a bishop that was abusing young girls in that ward and got all kinds of stuff, and they still didn't have any kind of policies in place. So I, as much as of a pain as it was, I'm like really grateful for that. I would prefer my kids to go to, places where I know that there's not a rap sheet on people, because we've all seen you can't just because you're a member doesn't mean you're innocent of a criminal past or shady actions or anything.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, like we have church tradition and we have church policy, and a lot of the times the two don't see eye to eye.
Mhm.
But like doing temple recommend interviews, like it's full. Like every time I did a young woman's temple recommend interview, I had her parent, one of her, either mom or dad, in the room with me, and it was totally allowed. And like you can even go to the extent of, like if the bishop's giving a woman an interview, that somebody else can be in the room, in there with it. He can ask or she can ask for somebody else to be in the room during the temple recommend interview, or any type of interview for that matter.
Yeah, I mean, for your own protection as the interviewer.
No, that's just it.
I
Like
think
even
that's
like
wise.
now, or anytime I meet with, anytime I have a meeting with a woman of any sort, I either leave the door open or I have somebody else come in.
It's wise.
It is.
So just one last thing, I just have to do this from the legal counsel's perspective. And I mean, unless anyone has anything else to say about that, I'm thinking the best policy is just to have everything documented, documentation, record.
Yeah,
Is there anything else I'm missing on that?
I think it probably needs to be something in there about like specific guidance, like either the people you need to call in this event,
Yeah.
so that everybody's made aware of that.
And
It's a very clearly defined process, because if there is not a clearly defined process, then it's left up to the discretion of the person or the experience of the person doing the investigation or taking the report. And so if they have a process of, this is what I need to do, if somebody reports to me, I have to report it to X, Y, and Z.
yeah, as well as maybe even an obligation to it's just stipulating kind of to the bystander point, but reiterating it maybe as legal counsel, or maybe the two kind of coincide, that every individual that witnesses, overhears, or is a victim of sexual harassment has an obligation to report it. That way, they're really the policy states very clearly that if you don't, then you could be considered maybe complicit in that sexual harassment. So it does help the liability aspect of the company, and unfortunately, legal counsel likely has the interest of the company at heart, maybe more than the individual. But I think that that's likely important for the Title VII things to be compliant with those federal and state requirements.
Yes. Okay. All right, awesome. I think that about wraps it up. And if you didn't get a chance to read it, what actually happened in that case was that that when he called the counsel, he forgot about caller ID. The lawyer used his information to figure out who it was, and she contacted the company, and they did a formal investigation, and eventually Julia Martinez's husband found out. He beat her up and forced her to quit.
That's wild.
And I know the accused denied all the charges, claiming that Martinez made it all up to protect herself from pending layoffs. Ding ding ding. Layoffs. He survived. The accused survived. He blamed everything on DeCoste for calling corporate counsel, and there was so much animosity that DeCoste ended up leaving the company. So, and if at the very end there it says, what was Lone Star's sexual harassment policy? If Lone Star had one, did Jack know anything about it? And what policies, procedures, or training? So we kind of talked about that. Like, he clearly didn't know what the policy was with the way he, proceeded with that, and what kind of training might have improved the situation that he found himself in. And I feel comfortable that we talked about that enough where, I don't know, everyone's made aware of the policy, and knows where to find that information. So, okay, so I think that about wraps up that part of it, and then we can get into the doohickeys part, unless anyone has anything else to say about this case study.
I just was going to say, every year I have to do what's a code of conduct training. It takes about an hour, and I have like a month. It has to be done in February. And then anybody that's ever onboarded as a supervisor within that, outside of that time frame, has to complete that training within the first month of their onboarding. And it does a couple things. It obviously makes me aware of what the policy is, resources that are available, but also protects the company so that somebody can't come back later and say, well, I had no idea about the policy. Well, it's like, well, it says right here that for the last 7 years, you've been taking the code of conduct training. So
once a year.
You do know about the policy. So once a year, it has to be done. Every supervisor has to take it all the way up to the CEO.
What is the training? Is it like in a portal? You have to like read and then take a little quiz, or is it just like reading a document?
It's an online trainings. Yeah, so it's like some things where you click on, it's interactive, and it goes through, the different aspects of the code of conduct, because it goes everything from, harassment,
discrimination,
intellectual property laws about, taking bribes, all that stuff. But they have to do it every year, and I've done it there, and I've had it also in another place where it was just a formal training, like a classroom training that everybody had to go through, and then you were made aware of the policy, and you had to sign this thing that you received the training and were made aware of the policy. So, and it's a CYA for both individuals, especially for the company.
How are you guys, Kaylin and Jacob? How does your company handle it? Do you have to review a policy every year or do a
Not
training?
that I've been with the company that I'm with right now for going on 2 years in March. I mean, I haven't had any like training on that kind of thing. We are given, when we first start our job, we're given like 2 hours to go over the employee handbook and stuff like that, kind of make ourselves familiar. But past that, I haven't had any training. I haven't had anything like that. But we also do, just our company in general, we do a lot of group activities, which we have like these ground rules that go over all the time. So I don't know if that's kind of what they're implementing to not like as a preventative measure, but I haven't had any training or anything like that for what is being said.
Yeah, every year we have to review and sign off that we have reviewed the handbook. So we've at least acknowledged it, whether you have or not. If you're signing your name and you haven't willingly read it, then you shaft yourself. But we operate, our company essentially is a learning management platform for in-home care. So with that, we kind of have the ability to be able to deliver training that we produce ourselves for individual office members. So that's how we actually take our training, is just using it on our platform. And we had about, I would say, 12 hours worth of training to go through over the course of a 2-month period. And I think that was implemented just this year and likely will continue as something that is to be done within a 2-month window, kind of like Scott's company, to ensure that everybody is receiving that training as well as up to date on what the policies and procedures of the company are.
Are you doing that are you just supposed to like review it on your own time, or do you get paid for your training?
I mean, maybe I'm supposed to review it on my own time, but I do it while I'm working. I'll block out an hour on my calendar once or twice a week to go through those. And I don't suspect that they expect you 12 hours a week or 12 hours off the clock, quote unquote. I'm salaried, but off the clock to go through all of that training. If that's how it is, then they can write me up, but I'm doing it during work hours. Maybe I mean, the policy and understand that.
That's funny. Okay, that's awesome. Thanks for all of your input on that. We can kind of go into the doohickeys assignment, which we have to prepare for. So I'm trying to find, was it under week 6?
Week 3.
Was everyone able to get to the link that I sent? Was everyone able to get on the Google Doc that I set up?
Yeah. It's just a blank document.
Yeah, as of right now, yes. I just wanted to make sure everyone had access to it.
Yeah. So remind me, what were the 4 that we decided on? And maybe now that we've done sexual harassment, we've actually kind of gone through everything up to this point, I think, that is listed, right? Maybe except for recruiting and hiring. I don't know if we've done that one yet.
Yeah, it was
3. We have to do 3 problems. So I'm just going to put that into the document. Let's see. I think we had decided, I know I chose sexual harassment. What was the first week, Scott? I think you chose
performance appraisals, sexual harassment, and teams were the 3 that we decided on.
Yep. And then, and do we want, just trying to think of, because this has to be essay format, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, just want to double check. I was like, I'm pretty sure that's what I read, but just to verify.
Performance appraisals. Is the second one.
Okay.
And then teams, and then we have to choose whichever one is the critical problem that we want to expound on of those three.
Part of me is wondering if maybe diversity or equal opportunity laws should go in place of teams, just if we do have to justify that that's an issue that is more.
Let's go back to the case study and maybe Blake cruise over it really quick.
So yeah, I read this like a couple weeks ago. 90% of the managers were white, middle class, seemed to be chummy. So there's some discretion or discrimination, I mean,
Yeah.
there.
We could throw that one in there. I feel like with teams, depending on how the other ones go, I feel like they're very to the point, not much emotion. If we were to do teams, I feel like it could kind of get more into the touchy-feely side instead of this is how it is, this is the policy, that kind of thing. So it just depends on how we want the overall feel of our doohickey to be.
I think this next paragraph here, this one that your cursor's on right now, is a big deal. You know, like the employee not reporting injuries. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that would go back to. And what are our options, I guess?
It was
performance appraisals, equal opportunity laws, diversity, sexual harassment, recruiting and hiring.
Doesn't quite, at least at first glance, doesn't fit into any really one of those.
I think it kind of falls under performance appraisals a little bit.
Could. Part of me wants to say equal opportunity laws, but it's not like there's nothing, I guess, discriminatory about somebody cutting their hand on
I think that performance appraisals is for me, it's the critical problem, because you can't fire somebody or change behavior if you don't ever identify what is wrong. I think that's the framework for you know, because you're going to have to whack half the supervisors because of the infestation of nepotism and the good old boys club. I think is a root problem. But
yeah, and performance appraisals can also include this next paragraph when it talks about wanting to fire John because he talked back to his supervisor that
it does that. It addresses pay. I think it addresses expectations. It addresses turnover. I think it addresses turnover.
Yeah, and I don't know if you talked about this already. I was just glossing over this, but day 4 is like explicitly performance appraisals. Like halfway through the thing, it says that they have not been conducted. So it just further validates the choice to retain performance appraisals as one of our
Do we do diversity instead of teams then?
Yeah,
I think so.
I'll delete that.
Because teams, I think, is not of all of the the priority of the issue. I think teams is kind of towards the bottom.
Yeah. And I think out of all of these, because it addresses sexual harassment in seventh day. Yeah. So
harassment.
So we can, I think there's plenty on there to do that, but I think it sounds like the critical problem is the performance appraisals. To me,
That's my opinion.
because I think that addresses some of the safety issues and the dress code and pay and all that. I think that
I think so.
it falls under, to me, it makes most sense that it would fall under that umbrella more than anything else. I mean, I guess it could a little bit fall under recruiting and hiring, but not really, because they already work there.
Yeah.
So that could solve that in the future, but since they do already work there, it's like we can't go back and be like, just kidding, you're not hired. Like,
Yeah,
they
it's
already
just
work
not as
there.
applicable.
Yeah. Okay. So are we good with these?
Yeah, I think it's great.
Okay. So it's going to be performance appraisals is the critical problem. So then we need to have 4 solutions. Sexual harassment policy.
I think is what the other thing too, it said like 25% of the grade is the critical problem. Right, it said on one of the meetings we were on, and so the 25% of the paper needs to be the critical problem as well. Like it's
Yes.
So we're looking at 2 to 3 pages of the critical problem. And we're looking at like 2 paragraphs for each of the solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
25% of the grade and 25% of the paper should
Right.
be your critical problem.
yeah,
So I think what we can do here, because I was on that call too, and she said it works best not to just have everyone just come up with a solution, because we might reproduce the same solution 5 times or 4 times.
yeah.
But we just list the solution, and then we each take, we write about it. So we're doing 4 different solutions, but we can split it up on how we like expand upon it and write about it.
I
Do we want to
think
hammer those out right now so that we don't
Yeah.
double bill?
Let's do that.
Because it's kind of, I mean, I was planning on working on it later in the week because it's due next week. So
yeah, and even I think the way that I look at it is there's I think there's roughly like 9 pieces to this, or maybe it's 8, 7, something like that. But I think it's 7 pieces. The critical problem is likely maybe just one person's brainchild, and then everybody else has problem 1, 2, or 3, and then somebody's in charge of the introduction, somebody's in charge of the conclusion, and then somebody's in charge of the bibliography or works cited. So the person that likely works on this critical problem, or is maybe responsible for the critical problem, is only responsible for that because it's a much larger portion.
kind of like that idea.
And
Yeah, we
not,
can do that.
not to say that we can't, intersect with each other's things. If you see something that I'm writing and you would love to add something, I'm not going to be pressed about it. I'm not so prideful about my work that it can't be addended. But I think that way, kind of to your point, you don't want everybody's hands in multiple solutions, but likely just one coherent thought throughout each of these individual problems, but not burdening somebody with the critical problem. They have the most important piece of the work, and then has to contribute in some other ways to the introduction or the conclusion or the bibliography.
Okay. So yeah, I really like that, because since I think we kind of sort of brushed upon that last week, and we are kind of heading in that. So because I'm going to be writing the sexual harassment policy this week, I'll just take that one. I'll just take that problem. And then maybe Kaylin, since you did diversity, maybe you can just do that one.
Yeah. I mean,
And
I'm feeling, but
No, I'm so sorry. I could not find where the mute button was. Unmute button, sorry. So I can definitely do diversity. The one that I did last week, I had to write a policy for it. So I know quite a bit about it. So I could definitely do that one. So just to clarify, so the person who has the specific problem they're writing their solution and everyone's kind of piecing off and writing their own version of that.
No, you're doing all the solutions. You're doing that whole
Cool.
section.
Okay, I understand now.
And then
So
I'll do the whole sexual harassment section.
I'll take the critical problem, introduction, and conclusion. If you guys are good with that. You good with that, Jacob?
If you want to, totally fine. I was thinking if you wanted the critical problem, you would just have the critical problem and just be in charge of that critical problem. And then we can piece out the introduction, the conclusion, and the bibliography. I can take problem number 2 and the conclusion, for instance, and then Natalie can have the introduction and sexual harassment, and Kaylin can have the bibliography and works cited. I don't want you to feel like you have to do, at that point, I feel like you'd be doing 50% of the paper. So
3 pages.
The only problem with what you just mentioned, Jacob, is the bibliography and the works cited. They're based on everyone's problem. So if I was doing that one, I wouldn't have the resources that you guys use for that. I wouldn't have any of that to put it through. So one individual person can't do the bibliography and the works cited because everybody's doing their own. I mean, I can put it in the right format, but I don't have any other than
yeah.
And that's the way I see it, is maybe we just, drop links to whatever it is that we're working on throughout. And then the person that's in charge of the bibliography is making sure that it's in APA format with, the 12 type font, double spaced, hanging indent, just kind of a thing. So we can all list our resources in there, but then somebody is responsible for putting those resources into an MLA or an APA format for a bibliography.
What
sorry
platform do you guys write in? I use Word for everything.
I pretty much use Word.
So there's that in Word, there's the bibliography under references. There's the managed sources in the bibliography where you just punch in the information to the forms and it generates your
that's how I do it.
I just think if we all use the same format,
well then we've got the best bet. We also
we just do our own.
We'd have to do write a summary of that, of whatever our resource was, because I can double check everybody's I could definitely double check everybody's format. I could definitely do all of that kind of thing. I would not be able to read y'all's mind on what resources you guys did or where
I think we need to do our own works cited.
Yeah.
We're doing, and then we just compile.
Is it an annotated bibliography though?
And I'm looking actually right now because I was I don't know if we need to put the.
Yeah, because I don't know if there is a summary.
I don't think she's very specific. I think she just wanted the works cited.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it because if it's not annotated, beautiful. We love it. But if
it's on week 6.
Yep, getting it pulled up now to see the rubric, because I don't want us to miss points if we're supposed to do something and then we didn't do it. According to, doesn't say anything. So all that it has is for our actual criteria is grammar, spelling, and punctuation, that it has the 3 problems and that they're explained in detail. The problem has the 4 possible solutions and then clearly details each solution and how it should be implemented. The paper includes a thoughtful, detailed analysis of the most important problem and solutions with clear applications, and then that it demonstrates the concepts and then overall excellence. It says nothing about the actual bibliography. So don't think we would need to have the annotated bit.
Cool. More power to us.
Right. I'll
I don't
take
even know
it.
what you guys are talking about.
I'm more than happy to do the bibliography. If everybody just kind of dropped, likely we're using just online articles. If you do use a book, just include the title and the author, and I'll find everything else. But I have no problem going through and creating the annotated, or not the annotated, just the bibliography or works cited page, just utilizing the resources that you have as long as they're included in that Google Doc. I'll go and make sure that they're in there, and that way they're all in one format and they're all produced in the same way.
Because this is February 11th is when this is due. And then, because I'll probably start working on it later this week, because the 11th is next Saturday. So we've got a little bit of time, but I want to make sure that it's good work. So I'm gonna definitely make sure I get all mine done. And like I talked about earlier, I do have Grammarly Premium on my account, so I can always go through, make sure all the grammar, everything's correct like that too.
Okay.
Cool beans.
So
Okay.
the reason I was thinking I'll take introduction and conclusion is that those two are tied together and they're tied into the critical problem.
True. Oh,
Okay.
that's fair.
And it really isn't that much more.
That's
I mean,
totally
the critical
fine.
problem is 2 pages. And if everybody's problem is 2 pages, then I just need a page for the introduction and conclusion. That gives us a 9-page paper.
Okay.
I'll take
Okay.
problem 2, I'll take performance appraisals, and then I'll work on the bibliography as well.
Sweet. I've got diversity.
So do we want to shoot to have this done by like next Tuesday? And then we can,
Yeah,
is that too soon?
I think that. No, I think we can have like, I mean, I'm just gonna do it at the same time as I write this week's assignment. So I can definitely have it done by then. And then when we meet Tuesday, we can just, fix it or add to it or whatever we need to do.
I will try to. I'll try to get most of it done, if not all of it. I just got to see what work entails this next week, but I'll do everything I can to get that done. And if not, I'll have most of it.
I think that gives us the rest of the week. We can, we could close it out on Thursday if we need to have a quick, 20, 30-minute call to
Yep.
have it turned in by Thursday, not even have to worry about hitting the deadline.
Just getting it
That'd be
over
awesome.
with.
Awesome. Cool. And then the only other thing is next week, I will be a discussion leader going over whatever week 6 is. And then I'll host the meeting, send it out in the text and via email as well.
Do you want to do the same time? Does that work for you? Next Tuesday at 5 Mountain Time? Whatever.
It works for me.
Okay.
Less variation in these group meetings, the better.
I absolutely agree.
Agreed. Okay.
Cool.
I think that about does it for us. We'll just see it on the Google Doc.
Right,
Right.
cool.
Okay. All right. Have a good night.
Awesome. Yes.